Good afternoon, grade 12s. Let me also pass the same greetings to your teachers and to my colleagues who are also watching this broadcast. Welcome to the first session of mathematical literacy, and thanks to the University of the Free State for allowing us to be part of the IBP. This afternoon, I'm going to help you prepare for the control test that you're going to write on Friday. Before I do that, let me also introduce myself. I am Tembinete, the subject advisor for mathematical literacy in Muteo district. Remember, grade 12 learners, it is very important for you to prepare for formal assessment like control tests. It's not only the control test that you have to prepare for, but you also have to prepare for all formal assessment that you are given at school. By formal assessment, I mean the investigation and the control test that you have already written in term 1, the assignment and the junior exam that you have already written as well in term 2. Remember the assignment that you have written as well, which will be part of term 4 formal assessment. And this control test that you are going to write on Friday. Not only this control test, but the preparatory examination that is also coming. All of those 6 components form part of your school-based assessment. And remember, the school-based assessment contributes 25% of your final mark. It's school-based assessment 25% and final examination 75%. When you add 25 and 75, they'll give you 100%. So this afternoon, I have decided to assist you in preparing for that control test that you're going to write on Friday. And for the preparations, I have actually prepared some questions on functional relationships. Before any waste of time, let us go straight to the question that I've prepared for you on functional relationships. Remember, functional relationships is also called learning outcome number 2, or some people call it LO2. The first question on functional relationships is, Pakisho decides to remove garden refuse each Saturday. Remember, some people call this refuse, they call it garbage or they call it rubbish. It will cost Pakiso 450 to hire the bakkie and 30 rands per load for petrol. Let me repeat this statement. Pakiso decides to remove garden refuse each Saturday. It will cost Pakiso 450 to hire the bakkie and 30 rands per load for petrol. If you look at the statement, we have actually 2 values. 450 for hiring the bakkie and 30 rands per load for petrol. Moving on, the first question on this 1.1 says, give an equation for the total cost for removing any number of loads of garden refuse per Saturday. Give an equation for the total cost of removing any number of load of garden refuse per Saturday. If we go into the answer, remember the question said you must calculate total cost. We start our answer by writing total cost is equals to 450. Remember, the 450 is to hire the bakkie, plus the 30 rands. We're told that 30 rands per load, so it will be 30 rands multiplied by number of loads. Okay, looking at that answer, total cost is equals to 450 plus 30 rands multiplied by number of loads. Some people can call 450 a basic fee, or a basic variable. So 450 will always be there because Pakiso has to pay 450 for hiring the bakkie. And then we'll add it to the 30 rands multiplied by the number of loads that Pakiso will have to deliver. So our formula will be total cost is equals to 450 plus 30 rands multiplied by number of loads. Remember, grade 12, when you write a formula, there must be a variable. In this case, our variable is number of loads. If for any chance your formula has 30 rands multiplied by 10, it means you do not have a variable. So for your formula to work, there must always be a variable. So the formula is total cost is equals to 450 plus 30 rands multiplied by number of loads. In case you don't want to write number of loads, you put an N there. So you have 450 plus 30 rands multiplied by n. Remember, if you put a variable there, you must always explain somewhere what that n means. Or if you don't want to put n, you can put x. But somewhere you must explain what the x mean. I hope you have captured that. Moving on to 1.2. Use the equation in 1.1 to calculate the value of a and b. There is our table. On the table we have number of loads 0, 1, 3, 5, 7, 8 and 10. On the total cost in rands we have 450, 480, 540. We have A that we have to calculate. We have 660. We have B that we have to calculate. And we have 750. And remember they said we must use the equation in 1.1 to calculate the value of A and B. But before we calculate the value of A and B, let us test with the formula that we have written there whether we'll get 450. Remember, we said the formula is 450 plus, let me put a bracket there, 30 rands multiplied by number of loads there is written as 0. I will put my 0 there. There, my answer is 450. I hope you also got 450. Meaning the answer is as the one that is provided. Then it means my formula is correct. Let me also check for if the number of loads is 1, for in case some of you did not catch that. Going back to the formula, we said to calculate the total cost, it will be 450 plus, let me open the bracket, 30 rands multiplied by, in this case the number of loads will not be 0 but it will be 1. We're trying to check whether the 480 will get that answer. Then we substitute the number of loads by 1. There, our answer is 480. That means the formula is correct. Then after you have checked whether with your formula you get the answers provided in the table, is then that you can go and calculate the value of A and B. But in case you don't get the same answers as in the table, it means that there's something wrong with your formula. Therefore, you'll have to go back and rework your formula so that it gives you the answer of 450 and 480 before you can continue finding the answer of A and B. Remember that, grade 12s. Now, let's check. Remember the formula? They said use the formula that we have constructed in 1.1. The formula that we have constructed is total cost is equals to 450 plus 30 rands multiplied by number of loads. And if you look at the table, the value, the A that you have to calculate is on the total cost in rands. Meaning in the formula, you have to calculate the total cost. So total cost is what we have to calculate. 450, we know about it. 30 rands, we know about it. Now we have to substitute number of loads. If you look at the table for number of loads, it says, remember the total cost is A, which is what we have to calculate. It's 450 plus 30 rands multiplied by 5. There is that 5. Number of loads is 5. We are looking for the total cost for 5 loads. Hence, in the formula, on the number of loads, we substitute by 5. If you multiply 30 by 5 and then add to 450, it will give you the answer of 600. It means if he transports 500 loads, the total cost will be 600. Okay? And again, remember, we were supposed to calculate the value of B. And again, if you look in the table, the value of B is the total cost in rands. So it's the same procedure that we applied for calculating the value of A. We still have our formula. Total cost is equals to 450 plus 30 rands multiplied by number of loads. Pardon my spelling there. I don't know why I was thinking of loaves. Maybe I like food. Okay? Remember the total cost is B, which is what we have to calculate. 450, it's in the formula, plus 30 rands, it's in the formula. Now we have to substitute number of loads. Remember when you go back to the table, they say number of loads there is 8. Hence, in the formula for number of loads, we substitute number of loads by 8. And then you have 30 times 8 plus 450, which will give you 690. Meaning the answer for B is 690. So if he has to transport 5 loads, it will be 600 rands the total cost. If he has to transport 8 loads, it will be 690 the total cost. Remember what we did before? We first tested whether the formula that we have written in 1.1, whether it will give us the answers that were provided already in the table. If the answers we get using our formula, it means there's nothing wrong with our formula. We can continue. But remember I said grade 12s, if you find that you don't get the same answers 450 and 480 with the formula that you have already constructed, it means you must go back and check your formula. Something is wrong with your formula. So now we have calculated the value of A and B. Moving on to 1.3. Pakiso charges 120 per load to remove garden refuse. Pakiso charges 120 per load to remove garden refuse. Give an equation for the total income. Remember in the previous one, we were supposed to give an equation for the total cost. Now in this one, we are supposed to give an equation for the total income from removing any number of loads of garden refuse. Again, we must construct a formula. But this time, the formula is on the income. The previous time, the formula was on the cost. Because remember, for Pakiso to remove the garden refuse, it will cost Pakiso some money. Remember the cost we said is 450 for hiring the baki and 30 rands per load. And again, Pakiso must charge people for removing their garden refuse. So it said that Pakiso charges 120. Now we must come up with a formula. Remember the formula? It is still based on total income. The previous formula was based on total cost. Now the formula is total income. So total income is equals to 120. Remember Pakiso charges 120 per load. Then we multiply that by number of loads. So the income of Pakiso will be based on how many loads will Pakiso take of garden refuse. So our formula for the total income will be total income is equals to 120 multiplied by number of loads. Let me repeat that formula again, grade 12s. Total income is equals to 120 multiplied by number of loads. I am sure you have seen how we came up with that formula. Now moving on to the next question. I hope I am not too fast for you grade 12s before you steal my answers. 1.4. It says use the equation in 1.3 to calculate the value of C and D. Remember the equation was income is equals to 120 multiplied by number of loads. Okay. Now we must calculate the value of C and D using the formula that we have already constructed. Going to the table, we are given number of loads and we are also given the total income in rands. If there's 0 loads, then the income will be 0. Of course, you will not be paid for work that you do not do. If he transports 1 load, the income will be 120. If he transports 3 loads, we don't know how much the income will be. That is why we are giving the variable C to calculate. If it transports 5 loads, the income will be 600 rands. Then if it transports this D number of loads of which you don't know how many, we know that his income will be 840. And for 8, it will be 960. For 10, it will be 1,200. Remember what I said to you, grade 12s. Before you calculate the value of C and D, you need to use the formula that you have already constructed to see if you will find the answer here, which is 0, and the answer there, which is 120, using the formula that you have already constructed. If you use that formula and you find these answers, you know that there's nothing wrong with your formula. But if you use the formula that you have constructed and you do not find these answers, then you must know that there's something wrong with your formula. You must go and re-look at your formula. Now, let's also test whether the formula will give us the answers in the table. Remember we said income is equals to 120 multiplied by, in this case they said 0 loads. So we multiply 120 by 0. And the answer is 0 as in the table. That means we have the correct answer using our formula. But before we go on, let's also test again using 1 as number of loads. Let's go back to the formula. It says 120 multiplied by 1, because he's going to transport 1 load. If you multiply 120 by 1, the answer is 120. Somebody who said 120, you are quite correct. So 120 is the correct answer, meaning using our formula, we managed to find 0 as the answer and 120. Now we can go to the formula and calculate the value of C and D. If you look in the table, the value of C is the total income. So the formula is total income is equals to 120 multiplied by number of loads. Remember we said C is the total income, meaning on the total income we substitute by C, because C is the total income that we are supposed to calculate. Now we have 120, which is already in the formula, and then we multiply by number of loads. If you look there, they say to get C as the income, you must transport 3 loads. So now on the number of loads, we substitute by 3. Now we have C is equals to 120 multiplied by 3, which will give us 360. It means if Pakiso transports 3 loads, the income will be 360. Now, let's check for calculating D. Remember in the previous one when we were calculating the cost, the C and D was in the total cost. But this time, C is on the total income, but D is on the number of loads. In this case, we're no longer going to calculate the total income, but we are going to calculate the number of loads that will make Pakiso to have an income of 840. Still going back to our formula. Remember our formula is total income is equals to 120 multiplied by number of loads. And in this case, the total income is provided. We say the total income is 840. We still have 120 multiplied by, but we do not know how many number of loads that made Pakiso to have an income of 840. So we substituted into our formula. Total income, we substituted by 840 is equals to 120. Number of loads we substituted by D, because they said number of loads is D. Now we need actually to make D the subject of the formula. Now we need to work our formula around so that we end up having the value of D. Okay? So D, we've made it the subject of the formula, is equals to 840 divided by 120. Or somebody might say, if you have up to there, you can divide there by 120. You can also divide there by 120. Remember, mathematically they say what you do on the left hand side you must also do on the right hand side. So if you divide both sides by 120, on this side you are only left with D, and on this side you have 140 divided by 120. You can write it in this fashion. D is equals to 840 divided by 120. Now we can find the value of D. If you divide 840 by 120, you get 7. Meaning, Pakiso must have 7 loads. Remember, we are calculating the value of D, where we are finding the total number of loads if the income for Pakiso was 840. With the formula, we managed to find 7 as the number of loads that Pakiso must have in order to have an income of 840. Do you see that the two calculations are different? The first one, we're calculating the total income, and if you look there, the C is on the total income. The second one, we're calculating the number of loads, and if you look there, D is on the number of loads. So to transport 7 loads, Pakiso will get an income of 840. I hope you got that one right. Now, the last question on functional relationships. 1.5, it says, use the table in question 1.2. Remember, the table on question 1.2 was based on the total cost. And 1.4, remember the table on 1.4 is based on total income. To draw the cost graph and income graph on the same set of axes. I have actually drawn or constructed my grid. But before we draw or construct those two graphs, the cost graph and the income graph, let's look at the grid. If you look at the grid, on this side we are given number of loads, and on the y-axis or on the vertical side we are given the amount in rand. Remember, what you have been taught is that the amount is the dependent variable. The amount depends on the number of loads. So every time the dependent variable must go on the vertical axis, or mathematically we call it the y-axis. And the independent variable must always go on the x-axis, or we call it the horizontal axis. But remember, grade 12s, most of the time in a control test or in an examination, you are already given this grid, and in most cases the grid is already indicated which one is the independent and which one is the dependent. Now, if you look at the grid, you see that we have 0, we have 50, we have 100, we have 150. All of those, we call them major grids. And most of the time, the major grids are dark or are bolded. The major grids are always darkish than the other grids, or they are bolded. So if you look at 0, you look at 50, you look at 100, you look at 150. All those, we call them major grids. But apart from major grids, we also have minor grids. Between 0 and 50, you'll see that we have thin lines there, which we call minor grids. The reason why I'm telling you this is because, remember, you need to work out what scale was used in order to come up with this grid, so that when you plot your points, you know the scale. Let's look at the first one. Remember, it's 0 to 50. And if you look between 0 and 50, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 minor grids. And if you look there, you'll see that each minor grid is actually 10, which means it's 0, 10, 20, 30, 40, and then 50. From 50, You add 10, it will be 60, 70, 80, 90, 100. Meaning the major grids are 50, 100, 150, but the minor grids are 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. This is very important for you to work out the scale of the grid before you start plotting any points. Now that you are aware of that, you can start plotting our points. Remember, let's start first with the cost graph, because we started first calculating the cost. If I can show you this so that you remember the values that we had, I hope you can see those values so that you remember which values were there, and then we can start plotting those values. Remember, the values were on the total cost in rands. It was said for 0 loads, the cost will be 450. Remember that 450 is for hiring the bakkie. Now we go to our grid. There is 0. And then we look for 450. Remember, it's 50, 100, 150, 200, and there is 450. Because remember, number of loads is 0, but the cost is 450. That is why we place there on the y-axis. The second value is 1 load, and the total cost is 480. So there is 1 load, and let's look at 480, that's 450, 60, 70, 480 will be right there. I think you got that. Let's move on. 3 loads, the cost will be 550. There is 3 loads. Now let's look at the cost, 540. There is 500. 510, 520, 530, 540 is just below 550. And now the next value, the number of loads, remember it's 5. And remember, we did calculate that value of A and we found it as 600. So we look for 5 loads and then we look for 600. And exactly there, that's why you'll plot your point at 600. The next value is 7 loads and the cost is 660. There is 7. Remember, there is 600. There is 650. Just above 650 you get 660. And now again we look for 8 loads. But if you look at our number of loads, we have 7 and then we have 9. But in between there, we will have 8. So that's why you look for 8, between 7 and 9. So you have 8 loads, and the cost for 8 loads will be 690. If you look there, we said 650, 60, 70, 80, and 90. 690 will just be below 700. And the last value that we have to plot is 10 loads, and the cost will be 750. Remember again, we have 9, we have 11. Between 9 and 11, you find 10 loads. So our 10 will be there, and the cost will be 750. So we go up 10, and then 750. Now that we have already plotted our points, remember we must just now join our points with a straight line. I hope my line will be straight. Hope you can all see that. We now join our points with a straight line there. Let's now label this graph there cost, or you can write total cost. It will be 5. Now that we have already drawn a graph for the cost, let us now go again and draw the graph for the income. I'll also try and show you the values for the income so that you remember. Remember, we are told that you must draw the cost graph and the income graph on the same set of axes. We are done with the cost graph. Now we must draw the income graph. If you look there, they said for number of loads, if it is 0, there's 0 income. If you don't work, you don't get paid. So in the graph, we look for 0 and 0. It will be exactly there. For one load, it will be 120. There is 1. And then remember, there's 100. And we said the minor grids go by 10, 10. So it will be 100, 110, 120. Pardon me. And then again, we said for 3 loads, remember we calculated the value of C and we got as 360. There is 3. And then there's 350. Just above 350, you'll get 360. And then for 5 loads, here we've seen that is 5 and then is 600. There is 5 and there is 600. Meaning, if he transports 5 loads, the cost will be 600. And if he also transports 5 loads, the income will be 600. That is where the cost will be the same. The cost and the income will be the same. Going on, remember we said if the income is 840, number of loads will be 7. We already calculated this. So there is 7 and we must look for 840. There's 800, 10, 20, 30, 40. Just below 850. And now the next one, it's 8 loads and the income will be 960. Remember again, grade 12, I said it's 7 and then it's 9. Between 7 and 9, that's where you find 8. So it will be 8. And you must look for the income, which is 960. We have there 950. Just above 950 on the first minor grid, you get 960. And the last point that we have to plot, they said for 10 loads, the income will be 1,200. And again, between 9 and 11, you will find 10. Remember for 10, we said the income will be 1,200. So it's 10. We go up, 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 and that's where we find 1,200. After we have plotted those points again, we must again join those points with a straight line. Okay. I hope my line will be straight again. Okay. Now, let's label that graph total income. Remember, we are told to draw graphs of the cost and graph of the income. Now we have drawn the 2 graphs. This one will be the total cost and the other one will be for the total income. Remember, we now have what we call the break-even point. The break-even point means the income is equals to the cost, or the cost is equals to the income. That is how we are supposed to draw the 2 graphs, the one for the total cost and the one for the total income, using the same set of axes. It looks lovely. I hope you agree that my 2 graphs look lovely. Remember, don't forget to always label your graph so that whoever is marking, being it your teacher or during the final examination, being it the markers, they must see which graph is for the cost and which one is for the income. I hope that you have learned a lot on the functional relationships, and I hope should a question come based on functional relationships, either in the test or in the examination, you will now be able to answer those questions. But that was not the only thing that I prepared for you this afternoon, grade 12s. I also prepared one question on space, shape, and measurement. I know that most of our grade 12s are finding it difficult to do questions based on space, shape, and measurement. Space, shape, and measurement, we also call it a learning outcome number 3 or LO3. This activity I took from Via Africa, page 19, exercise 1. We're only going to do 1.1. 1.1 says, I hope you can read there. It says, calculate the volume in liters of the containers shown below. If you look at these containers, let's look at the first container. This first container, we call it a rectangular prism. If you look at this container, you have your length, you have your breadth, and you have your height. The second container, we always call it a cylinder. Why a cylinder? Because the base is round and also the top will be round. Once the base is round and the top is round, we refer to that as a cylinder. But let's first look at calculating the volume for a rectangular prism. Remember, the formula for calculating the volume of rectangular prism is given by length multiplied by the breadth multiplied by the height. I don't think you need to memorize this formula because every time in a formal assessment, being it the test or the examination, the formula is always provided. All you need to do or all you need to have or know is how to substitute into the provided formula. Let me go back to the textbook. I said the length is 18, the breadth is 12,5, and the height is 24. And all of these are given in centimeters. So in this case, we don't have to convert the units because all units are in centimeters. All we need to do is to substitute into our formula. Going back to our formula. Okay. Remember I said the length is 18 centimeters multiplied by the breadth is 12,5 centimeters multiplied by the height is given as 24 centimeters. Now we have correctly substituted into the formula. We have 18 centimeters multiplied by 12,5 centimeters multiplied by 24 centimeters. If you multiply all three, your answer will be 5,400 cubic centimeters. Let me go back to the question. The question said, calculate the volume in liters of the containers shown below. But remember, the volume that we now have is in cubic centimeters. Remember, the units for volume are always cubed. So in this case, because we are using centimeters, the units will be cubic centimeters. The question said we must give the volume in liters. Therefore, we must be able to convert from cubic centimeters to liters. Remember, 1,000 cubic centimeters is equals to 1 liter. If you have 1 liter, it's the same as 1,000 cubic centimeters. Now we can use this conversion factor to convert 5,400 cubic centimeters into liters. There we go. Therefore, 5,400 cubic centimeters divide by 1,000 because we are converting these cubic centimeters into liters. Therefore, we divide by 1,000. Dividing by 1,000 will give you an answer of 5,4 liters. But remember, grade 12, Sometimes a question will request you to write the answer to the nearest letter. If maybe, for an example, the question said to the nearest letter, of which in this particular question, they did not say we must write to the nearest letter. But if, for an example, one of the questions says, give your answer to the nearest letter, then our answer will be 5 letters, meaning we round off our answer to a whole number. We don't write the decimal, we just write a whole number. Then our answer will be 5 letters. Let me go back to the second container. Remember the second container, I said it's a cylinder. If you look at this cylinder, we are given the height as 30 centimeters. We are given the diameter as 30 centimeters as well. And again, the units are the same. All we need to do is to substitute into the formula. Okay. I'm hiding my answers. The formula for calculating the volume of a cylinder is given by pi radius squared height, which means pi multiplied by the radius squared multiplied by the height. If you remember on that cylinder or on that container, I said we are given the diameter. But now the formula wants us to substitute the radius, not the diameter. So in a case whereby you are given the diameter but you need the radius, remember grade 12s, you divide that diameter by 2. Remember the diameter that you were given was 30 centimeters. So if you want the radius, you just divide 30 centimeters by 2 and you get 15 centimeters. There we substitute into our formula. Remember pi, it's a constant value. It's always given by 3.14. It will be indicated in your question papers which value to use for pi. And always we say use pi as 3.14. So pi is 3.14 multiplied by, remember the radius is 15 centimeters, not 30. 30 is the diameter. So it's 15 centimeters squared because the radius is supposed to be squared according to the formula. And now multiply by the height, and the height was given as 30 centimeters. And now we have our answer as 21,195 cubic centimeters. Remember the question said we must give the volume in liters. And I said to you, 1,000 cubic centimeters is equals to 1 liter. Now, we convert the cubic centimeters to the liters. We divide 21,195 cubic centimeters by 1,000 to convert the cubic centimeters into liters. And now we have 21.20 liters. I hope you got that answer. 21.20 liters. And again, I must say on this one, in case a question says, write your answer to the nearest liter, then your answer will be 21 liters. Meaning we only write it as a whole number without putting the decimals in that answer. But if the question does not say you must write your answer to the nearest liter, you will leave your answer as 21.20 liters. If they say to the nearest liter, then your answer will be 21 liters. I hope you got that, grade 12s. That was the only question I prepared on space, shape, and measurement. And I hope, grade 12s, that you have learned a lot from the two questions. Remember, the first one was based on functional relationships. The second one is now based on space, shape, and measurement. And those were the only two learning outcomes that I prepared for you this afternoon. And I'm sure you've learned a lot. Grade 12s, good luck for the coming test on Friday. Remember, the test is on Friday. Total marks for the test is 60 marks. And you are going to write that test in 1 hour and 15 minutes. I hope you've learned a lot this afternoon. on the questions that I've prepared for you. But again, for the test, don't only prepare on functional relationships and space, shape, and measurement. You also need to prepare questions on percentage calculations, meaning percentage increase and decrease. You also need to prepare on inflation, and you also need to prepare on ratios. Go and prepare yourself for the test. If you do not understand anything on the things that I mentioned that you must prepare for the test, please consult your teachers. Thank you very much for being with me this afternoon on this very first session for mathematical literacy. Hope to see you soon. For the teachers, remember we are meeting again on Monday. It will be a live broadcast again. We will be doing memo discussion. We'll discuss the memo that you are going to use to mark the control test that will be written on Friday. With those words, thank you very much for being part of live broadcast.